let me see if I can show you this. This is really just the basics of rigging. It's taken me years to understand that. So I've made this guy that he can go and bend into little directions here, and that's for me, that's huge, because for years I've been thinking, how do they do it? How do they rig things? I don't really, never got the concept, but I think I'm beginning to see how this all works. And just before I forget, this usually what I do is I write an article about this. So I've written everything down, but it's nice to repeat that. And if you want to learn alongside with me, maybe you can reap the benefits. I'll talk about weight maps a little bit, how you can make that a bit smoother here. And then of course, on top of that, we could also go and create ourselves not a smoothing modifier, as well as a subdivision surface modifier. Let's put both of these things on and see what it looks like. So convert to sub D first of all. That makes this a bit smaller, a bit smoother. This is still falling in on itself, so let's go and see if the smoothing modifier will help us there. Add smoothing modifier a little bit, but most importantly, the weight maps are gonna help us make this a bit smoother so that the geometry doesn't collapse in on itself. So let me create this guy from scratch. To the dark side of rigging. Oh my goodness. We have cookies and weight maps, absolutely. And it is the dark side of rigging. I totally appreciate that. But so in DAZ Studio, there's various types of rigging. So the one I'm using is the one with the figure setup tab. Let me show you what I've learned. I'm going to make myself a primitive, which is a cylinder with these proportions here. It'll be 1.5 meters tall and 50 centimeters in diameter, and it'll have 12 segments and 12 sides. And I'm doing that so that the polygons are fairly squared out. Usually you would build geometry like that in a different program like Blender or the ZBrush or wherever you build your 3D geometry. You usually do not use DAZ Studio for that, but that's quite okay. I'm going to go and change over to my wire texture shaded view just so that I can see the geometry here. This is what this thing looks like, but in the scene tab I can see it's just a cylinder and it's just an object, so it currently doesn't have that hierarchy going that we can expand like the top, middle and bottom that we had before. So for that, in all types of rigging software that I've seen, usually if it's not automatic rigging, like where you put points and it just infers things like a humanoid IK rig or something. If it's a standard object you want to rig, anything from a simple door to something like the hood of a car to a proper character, you have to place bones in the figure, and then you have to associate that with the face groups that are supposed to be changed by those bones, and then you add weight maps to make that bend more or less, or make it look ugly, more or less ugly. So that's what rigging does in principle, and you can use this approach in DAZ Studio as well. But there's an easier way to do this, and it took me literally years to understand why that is. There's a thing called the figure setup tab, and let's bring it up. Window panes, figure setup. This is it. And if you drag that out, that's kind of a largish tab. I'll go and put that on my right hand side here. It wants to be fairly large here, and it has a kind of interesting options. We need that in order to import an OBJ into here and then drag that over to this side and then create our bone hierarchy from the face groups. So it's kind of weird to think that you have to have the face groups first and then DAZ Studio will work out where the bones will go from there. As I said, there's a way to just put the bones and then associate face groups, but it turns out that's actually more cumbersome to use the surface sets. So let's create some using the geometry editor that we had before with the tool settings open. I'm going to go and define some face groups. This is called different things by different programs. So in Blender, for example, they're called vertex groups. ZBrush calls them polygroups. So this is, sorry, just in case I wasn't quite clear what I was doing here. I'm selecting geometry with the paintbrush tool, essentially. So left click and drag some of the polygons that you like, and you can then hold control and then just add other polygons to it, but that'll be very cumbersome. So there's also little helpers that can that can make that for you. So this is kind of the most tedious part of rigging, I guess, of set up the face groups. So there's, once you've done that, you can just define the top face, and then when you right click on the selection, you can go and the geometry selection, there we go, there's something called grow selection. That's Control and the plus key together. So in reality, it's Control, Shift, and plus to get the plus to acknowledge that. So you can do that, and then it'll essentially just grow whatever the selection currently has. So I'm going to grow that to 4 faces down, and that will now be my top group. And I'll define that as a face group over here. So much like we've defined selection sets earlier, I'm going to define face groups here. These are them. So you have the default is everything. That's kind of the whole, you can define a surface, a region, and a selection set, as well as a face group. So I'm going to go and right click on the face groups and say create face group from selected. So that's totally what I'm going to do. And I'm going to call that top, because that's what it is. And now I have 2 here, default and top. We'll talk about default in a minute. I'll go and do the same thing on the bottom. So select all the bottom faces, then hit Control, Shift, and plus, and just go make myself a selection that encompasses all of that. And I'll go and do the same thing again. Click face groups, right click, create face group from selected, and I'll call that one bottom. And now the cool thing is, because we had one surface that was called default, that is essentially whatever is left over. So this is the middle part that I can use. I don't have to recreate it. I can just go and rename it. So double click and I'll call that middle. So now I can either go and select bits and pieces from here, or I can make things visible or invisible. So that's, you know, those are the surface groups defined. And I suppose at this point, let me go and save this out so that I don't lose anything that I've made here. On my desktop, maybe I'll go and make a folder, and I'll call that Rigging Adventure. And because this is all simple geometry, I'll be able to share all these files with you later. I might do that. I might put that on my Patreon page, so you can all have a look at this. I'll call this one Cylinder V1. How about that? Cylinder V1. That's a great title. So this just saves my DAZ scene. This hasn't really done anything in regards to rigging yet, because for that, for the figure setup tab, I need an OBJ. So in addition to that, I might go and select my cylinder object, and I'll go and say File, Export, and I'll put that on in the same folder, namely Rigging Adventure. I'll make maybe a subfolder in there that's called OBJs. In that, I'll select Wavefront OBJ, and I'll call that Cylinder with Groups, maybe. With groups, just so that I remember what that is. That is just the plain OBJ. I'll use the DAZ Studio preset for that. Boom, that's it. Technically, I can now go and remove my current cylinder from here. I don't need to see it anymore, so I'll go and get rid of it, because it's done its job. Now we're going to go and play with this scary thing called the Figure Setup tab. And so in here, on this right-hand side, under Geometry, I can go and right-click and say Add Geometry. So this is now something in which I need to go and bring in my OBJ. Let's do that. That is over on my desktop again. Somewhere's. Where's desktop? Desktop, well, there we go. Rigging Adventure. And in OBJs, oh, there's a cylinder with groups, so the one that I've just made. And it comes up with the standard import, standard import dialog. Hello, come over here. And I'll just use the DAZ Studio preset here, just so then the scale and everything else is correct. So I'll go and import that. And now I have my cylinder here. I can open it up, and I can see the groups that I had defined, bottom, middle, and top. And that's kind of cool. But on the right-hand side here, this is really where the whole magic is going to happen. So I'll go and grab my geometry from here, and then I'll go and left-click and drag it out. And then I'll go and move that over to where it says geometry here. So I'll just go left-click and drag and just drop it on here. And then this happens, which is, you know, also kind of weird and scary, but you know, we're getting there. This is now creating the bones that are inferred, or that are being inferred basically from the face groups here. So these are the bones, and the bones associate with a face group. That's how this works. So the bones, I can go and close them down if I wanted to do that. I can go and drag them into a hierarchy now. So in my case, I'd like the bottom to be the root node. On a character, it would be the hip, or on a tail, it'd be something else. Well, it depends on your object. So I'm going to use the bottom as my root geometry, from which all the other pieces go and start happening. So I'm going to drag the middle onto the bottom. So left click and drag the bone onto the bone, not the surface. And then we have this. So now the middle bone is parented to the bottom bone. And I'm going to go and take the top bone and parent that to the middle bone. And that creates my hierarchy now. That's kind of cool, isn't it? That is pretty neat. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because the groups that I've defined are now associated with the bones already. So usually I think the difficult part in rigging is that you have to do this afterwards. So it's kind of, there's so much more to explore. So once I've done that, once I've got my hierarchy set up, I need to make sure that this value here, the bone rotation order, is set. That's another difficult thing for me to comprehend. I mean, I've read this article on the DAZ website about how to get started with rigging. I've read that so many times that it just took me forever to understand that here. This is it. I might post that in the chat. This is basically all the articles they have on rigging, and they are correct, but you only understand that if you already know how to do it. It's not really a great way of teaching you how to do it. So that's a bit of a downfall. If you know exactly what's going on, you can go and you can understand it. But if you don't, then you're lost. So bone rotation, you can change these things from XYZ to XZY, YXZ, YZX, ZXY, and ZYX. And you think, I don't know what it means. Somebody tell me how to do it. It's tricky. The first letter, this is how I remember it. The first letter is the axis along which your bone will present itself. So in my case, I have a standing up cylinder, so that means it'll be the y-axis. This is how I can remember. It's actually very easy, but it wasn't obvious to me for many years. So my cylinder will have to have a bone rotation of YXZ or YZX. I still don't know which one, but it's going to be one of those. Like standing up cylinder, like the leg of a human being or the leg of a creature type thing, that would have a rotation order that starts with a Y. Then something like a tail that goes horizontally, that would be, depends on how your character stands. An arm would be the Z-axis. If you look at the front of the character, front's kind of X, and then the sides would be Z. So the arms would start with Z. But a tail that would go to the back, that would be the X. X would be the first letter of that. So that's how you can remember the bone rotation, or that's how you can at least think about the bone rotation. My cylinder will have to start with Y. Then the next two letters, like in my case here, YXZ, the second letter is going to be the axis that is least likely to rotate to 90 degrees. Still got a little bit of a problem with that. Whereas the third letter is going to be the axis of your bone that is most likely to rotate 90 degrees. One of those things, I think in my cylinder, that'll bend basically just like that and go wiggle like that. I think it doesn't really matter. I don't think will it rotate around the Y? Will it rotate around the, it'll rotate like this and like that. So I don't think it matters in my case. But yeah, that's what they say it does. So I'm going to use YXZ for my little example here. But I need to set up all my bones. So you can either go do this bone by bone, or you can multi-select all of these and then set all of them up to the same rotation. So I'm going to do that. YXZ. There we go. That is that. While we're on this menu, once we've done that, super important, we need to also go and set up basic maps for that. And that happens under here. Select weight map. So all bones, select all bones, then go and select weight maps. And that'll bring up this little dialog here. That'll tell you, well, you can generate maps for everything, or you can take things out if you want. So I might just take the bulges out because I'm not bulging anything right now. And I'm just going to use the twist X, Y, and Z. Scale, I don't think I need scale either, so I'm just going to use the twist axis. I don't need the map for scaling right now. So I'm just going to have to do this. Hey, hit accept. And I think that is almost it. Bear with me here. I think that is almost it. So if I go and create my figure now, I might just actually just go and save this again. And save this as cylinder V2. Because whatever's on the figure setup tab will be saved with the scene. But we don't have an object in our scene yet. So I think if I do that, if I go and hit that big blue button now that says create, that will create my object. You can apply a sub D automatically if you want to do that. I think maybe we won't do that, so that we just see the geometry and say boom. So now we have the same cylinder in our scene that we had before, and there doesn't really appear to be that much difference, except for on the scene tab, where we now see that this guy now has sections. It has the top node, just like a character, top node, then it has the bottom, the middle, and the top bones, and I can select them with my regular 3D manipulator just by clicking on the object. So that's quite nice. That's almost like, you know, part one of the puzzle done. I'll go and save another version of this. In fact, I'm going to go and close the figure setup tab. Maybe later. I'll go and save this as another version so that you guys can follow along there. So cylinder V3. Righty. But the problem is if I go and try and wiggle this around the x-axis, nothing appears to happen at the moment. And that's because I think I need to associate, well, I think I need to fill my map. So I need to tell my maps which bones to look at. And that happens, I think, don't quote me on it, I think it happens with the weight map brush tool. That's this guy here, weight map brush tool. You can also get it from the tools section, this guy, node weight map brush. And it now presents me with maps per portion of my object. So this is really tricky concept to grasp. So I've got the bottom, middle, and the top. And if I were to go and select the top, you can see that on the bottom, this whole thing has changed to red, which is kind of interesting. Whereas when I change this to top, there's nothing there. So that appears to me as if the Z rotation map for bottom is painted 100%, but the Z rotation map for top isn't painted on at all. So that's interesting. Same for middle. So bottom has all the maps, including Y and X rotation. So these are all three different maps here. It's a very difficult concept to grasp, but we have three maps, and they can be filled out depending which portion of the object they need to go and influence. So let's make that happen. Thanks, Epic. That's good to know. So to fill them, I'll go and select my top object here, then right click with my map brush tool onto the object, and there's this thing here, weight editing, that says fill selected, smooth selected, attenuate selected, fill by bone selection groups. And I think that is the kind of the key. If I click that, it will fill the top, middle, and bottom maps depending on where the bones are. So the bones, we haven't looked at the bones yet. We'll do that in a second. I'll go and do this now and check my bottom map. That is only filled at the bottom now, whereas the middle is now painted where that bone is, and the top is painted where that bone is. So this is nice, the way of it automatically distributing where the weights kind of need to be. And bones is something, as I said, we haven't looked at yet. These are just the nodes technically, but the bone tool, that is this guy here. That's the joint editor tool. That's another guy that you can select. And if you click on him, that's also under tools, joint editor. If you click on him, then you see that this is where DAZ Studio has made the three bones here. It's top bone, middle bone, and the bottom bone. And you can now go ahead and change the center point or the end point here into positions where they need to be. So if you have geometry that's not as nicely defined as this, so you got your bone rotation wrong, then the bones will be lying in the wrong direction. You can change all that with the bone editor tool. But the most important thing now is that I think there's also a bug in DAZ Studio. If I go back to my universal manipulator tool, select the top bit of my object, I can now go and bend it. Notice the obvious issue here is that while I'm moving the manipulator, this thing doesn't bend. It snaps into place the moment I let go of my left click. And so it does that, but it doesn't seem to do this while I'm moving it, and that's kind of bizarre. And I've tracked this down. I thought I was mad at first, but it doesn't seem to be the case. It's not actually me being mad. It's a bug in DAZ Studio. So I'll go and save this as cylinder version 4. Ding. All right, and I'll go and literally just close DAZ Studio down, and then I'll try again. I don't really know why it happens, but if I bring it back, if I go and restart DAZ Studio now, it'll bend no problem. I just don't know what that bug is. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe there's a magic tick box I've forgotten, but a bug in DAZ Studio must be mistaken. So recent cylinder V4. So same thing again. I select the top bit here and bends. And it answers on a postcard. I don't know why. I don't know why that happens. But this is our object rigged, and I'm thinking that's just seriously cool. It's a feature alto. That's exactly what it is. It's a feature. It's not a bug. It's a feature. This is what do people call that again? It is expected behavior. That is what it's called. So yes, now we can go and animate this guy into any axis. But there's also this issue that the geometry, depending on how much I bend it, the geometry kind of collapses here, so it doesn't bend nicely. It just goes and breaks the geometry. And usually that's something you fix with a clever combination of locking rotations, so locking rotational values, so that certain things that break your object, you just make sure the user can't do it. That's one way of doing it. But the other way that we can employ is the weight maps thing. So let's go back to the weight maps tool, and let's work on the X rotational map. So I'll go and select that. This is difficult. Let me go through this one more time, because this is something that I had great difficulties with maps. And where are they? What are they? How do they look? And so with the node weight brush tool selected, you can select one portion of your object, so bottom, middle, or top. We're using the top, so select that first. Then think about what map you'd like to fix. So remember, we have 3 maps. We have the X and the Y and the Z rotational maps. If I had enabled all properties when I created the maps in the figure setup tab, I'd also have the scale maps, and I had 3 bulge maps, so there'll be a lot more maps here. So I'm going to work on the X rotation. That's the value that gets adjusted with the red piece here. So this is the map I'm fixing. If I'm bending this thing into another direction, say the Z rotation, then my fix isn't going to show up. So that's something to remember. We're going to go and fix the X rotation, or the bulge here, this bit where my geometry collapses. And you can paint on this weight map, on this X rotation weight map, or you can go and do something similar to the geometry selection that we had there, and just go and smooth this whole thing out. And I think that's what I'm going to do. Smoothing means, yeah, wiggle, exactly. Smoothing means that wherever the map ends, like at the bottom, that's where we put a gradient. So rather than having an abrupt line, we're going to just smooth that out. And to do that, I believe, let's go and select the whole first part here. And you can once again, you can either go and use the geometry editor to go and select that, or you can go and just select the whole top bit here. Oops, deselect everything. Clear selection. You can go and hit plus here. Then the whole top is selected. There's another way to do that. I'll show you that too. Go back to node weight map thing. With this selection now, you can right click and say weight editing, smooth selected. And so once again, smoothing means that wherever the map is painted, that bottom bit just gets smoothed out. So let's go and hit that. You can enter a factor, 50%. I might enter something like 20 here in iterations. If you leave that on the default 1, it'll do very little. So if you crank that up, then you can really see that things change. And not only does the color change, but also the behavior of it changes. It's difficult to see with the selection in place. Let me go and geometry selection, clear all. You can see that my colors have changed now. So the bottom bit is bluish now. The top bit isn't quite as red anymore as it was a moment ago. And the more you adjust these maps, the behavior, the way the bones will influence the geometry that is being moved is going to change. So if I would like for there to be less influence here, I can go and paint this out. I can either do that, or I can go and smooth just a... Whoops. What am I doing there? That's uncool. What was that? That's not what I wanted to do. This is because I'm painting. My modifiers aren't quite set up as good as they could be. If I'm just thinking, maybe I'll just smooth this bit out. I think I can do that. Geometry, weight editing, smooth selected, so just those. Gets even smoother here. Clear selection. So yeah, that's how to do that. You can really go to town with painting those maps, but remember you have to paint every single map. So while the X map is now fixed in this direction or thereabouts, it behaves slightly different in that direction because I haven't smoothed these faces out. But also notice that if I go and bring this kind of back to 0 here, if I move it into the X direction, that is a different map, so I have to go and apply my fix again to a different map if I wanted for this to behave the same way. So this is now a different map. If I change to that, you can see that it's still completely red, so I'd have to go and fix that as well. Kind of interesting, isn't it? That is how that works. Let's, in fact, while we're here, let's fix that as well. So this is probably what artists spend a ton of time with. Let me go and select my whole surface from here as well. So that's under geometry selection, and then I can go and say select by, check it out, face groups. So I can select the whole top from here. I don't have to switch back to the geometry editor. Weight mapping, Michael, how you doing? No problem. So select the whole top, and then we go and do exactly the same thing that we did before. We go into weight editing, smooth selected, ding, and now my X rotation map is also saved. Kind of cool, huh? So with these two things on the top part fixed, let's go fix the middle part. So that now requires us to go to the middle, which has the same thing. We're going to fix Z rotation first. Let's go and select once again, select by, face groups, middle, ding. And actually this is the top part is still selected, so let's deselect that. So clear selection. Now let's select the top, the middle part, selection, select by face groups, middle, there we go. And we're gonna go weight editing, smooth selected. Same again in the Z rotation, but also in the X rotation where it's still completely red. So I'm gonna have to do this there as well. And this took me literally forever to get the concept of bones, weight maps associated with rotational axes as well as portions in your object that you want to fix. So brain, you know. Let's fix that as well. And while we're here, let's go test it, in fact. Middle part now also bends smoother than it did before. I can literally build a slinky and then animate him. I'd like that. I'd like that. And then we can go do that as well. Also fairly smooth. But the bottom is still not fixed. So let's go fix the bottom next. So once again, select the bottom part of your object. Then go to the weight map tool. Make sure the selection is cleared. Clear selection. Then right click and, well, first of all, this is the bottom, isn't it? The bottom is that was the top selected there. So let's select the bottom face by geometry selection. Select by face groups, bottom. Now, geometry, weight editing, rather. Smooth selected. And this is on the X rotation now. That's done. Now let's fix the Z rotation. Editing, smooth selected. Boom. So now that's also smoothed out. Kind of interesting. Let me go and deselect everything. And since there's also now a twist, we should also fix the Y rotation map while we're here. Shall we do that? Should we fix Y rotation as well to make it really smooth? Yeah, let's do that. Why not? While we're here. Start with the bottom. Once again. Dang you. Geometry selection. Select by face groups. But we learn by repetition, which is what I find quite exciting. So you just go and do this over and over again, and eventually it'll grow on you. There we go. So now the polygons are less influence less as I twist my thing around the Y-axis. And let's go and do this on the middle as well. So we're fixing the Y rotational maps now. So clear selection. You can also set yourself up a shortcut for that. Select by face group middle, Y rotation, editing, smooth selected. We haven't twisted it yet, so we're not going to see that big a difference. And now the top. Clear selection, geometry selection, select by face groups top, smooth, and we're nearly done. Smooth. There we go. Well, perfect. And now I can go and bend my Slinky with my regular tool here. I think I might also give Slinky a little color. I did like seeing him in all kinds of other different colors. So maybe I don't know, maybe orange. Is that good? Yeah, there we go. Slinky's got an orange color. Now that's cool. So I can go and move any of these parts of my object, and they all look fairly handsome. And I can go another way. If I wanted to have this guy look even better, then I can add a smoothing modifier. Let me go and close the figure setup tab now, so I can go and move this out of the way a bit. Yeah, so now I can go and apply the usual smoothing bits and pieces if I wanted to do that. So with my whole top object selected, I can go under Edit, and this is what the Figure Setup tab also offers to do by default. Just apply a subdivision surface modifier to it. That'll just make this thing all look just like a like a worm, and it bends even better because there's more geometry now. Is that cool or what? It's kind of interesting, isn't it? How this works. I mean, there's so many other tools that you can align your bones with the shape of the figure, and in real life models you're going to have to do a lot more adjustment. But yeah, that's basically rigging in principle. It's kind of cool, isn't it? And I've just found that out. I thought I'll share it with you.